Now, as you're starting to do your composites, you're going to notice that things don't always necessarily match the background that you're putting them into. So you can find a photograph of a person and you can drop them in, and they may have a completely different set of colors to them, a completely different set of, lighting can be different, that sort of thing. Now the lighting part is much harder to solve. Okay, so if in the background photograph the light's coming from the right, and in the photograph, of the guy that you just put in there, the light's coming from the left, that's going to be very hard. My recommendation is to flip the layer, and then that way the light's coming from the right direction. That may or may not work for your composition. You may not like the way that they're facing, in which case you probably just need to find another photograph. You can try adjusting the lighting, but it's very difficult. However, colors are very easy. And adjusting colors to make things look right, or contrast and other stuff. And the way we do that is through something called an adjustment layer. Okay, and an adjustment layer is really neat. Adjustment layers are, if you've just started up in the Essentials and you're in Photoshop, you can double click here right above the layers palette, and you're going to see the adjustment layers. And there's a whole bunch of them in here, and then they've even got presets. But what you want to do is you want to make sure that you're selected on the layer that you want to add the adjustment to. And I'm going to show you some of the mistakes that you can make with this. And then you want to choose. And there are just a ton of them here. You can just change brightness and contrast. You can change what we call levels or curves. There's an exposure change. So if you get a photograph that's a little too bright or a little too dark, you can kind of adjust the exposure. Vibrance, I almost never use that one. Hue saturation, I use this all the time. Color balance, I use all the time. So if we wanted to take a look at what we're doing here with this guy, maybe I've decided that I want him to look a little different. He's got this cool blue background. Maybe I want to make him look a little bluish. Just a tinge, just a touch. Now, when you first add one of these, all you have to do is go up here and you just have to click. So let me just, we'll just start with the brightness contrast now to show you what I can do. If I click on that, all of a sudden you see that the window changes and you get these sliders here for brightness and for contrast. And now all of a sudden down in your layers palette, you have a new layer that says brightness contrast. Now here's what's really brilliant about this is notice it also came with a layer mask. So what's really neat is you can adjust, you can make an adjustment and then you can control where in the image it is or is not using your layer masks. Okay, because remember layer masks affect opacity and transparency. So what I'm going to do is I can just change the brightness and the contrast to lift things up, and to change the contrast, maybe make something snap a little bit better or something like that. Now the first thing that you should notice as I just did that is you should have said, well, Mr. Weisbrod, that just affected both layers. Okay, you're absolutely correct. If you just put your layer, your adjustment layers right out on top, it's just going to affect, everything that's below it. Okay, so that's principle number one with these things. However, you can clip, that's what they call it clipping. You can clip an adjustment layer to the layer that it is directly above. So if I go here and I see this little button right here, okay, if I hover over that, it says this adjustment affects all layers. Click to clip the layer. So I'm going to click this and watch what happens right here in my layers palette. Boom. Now, see how I've got this little arrow? Okay? And now it indented the layer over to the right a little bit. And now if I go up here, it says this adjustment clips to the layer. Click to affect all layers. See? And you can see this changing over here on the left, right? All right, so let's just play with that a second. So all layers, just the layer at the top. See that? So now I can adjust my brightness and my contrast, and it only affects the layer that's directly below it. The other thing is these filters, or not really filters, these adjustment layers are stackable. So as I continue to add more they will continue to affect what's going on. So let's do something. Oh, I just thought of it. You know, we could do something kind of funny and make him look like he was underwater, let's just say, okay? So I'm going to trash my brightness contrast here, and I'm going to go back and I'm going to add a hue saturation adjustment layer. Boom. And now I can actually take the saturation way down. See how it's kind of making it almost like a black and white, like an old photograph? Okay, but again, it's affecting my background layer, so I don't want to do that. So I'm going to clip, and now I can change his hue and his saturation, or I can adjust the hue and make him look, okay, and shift all the colors that are in the rainbow and just adjust them around, which is kind of fun to do, but practically it doesn't always have something. Or if I want to have more control, I can shift him until he looks blue, right? You know, right there. But that's not really going to help. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add another adjustment layer that allows me to change the colors. So I'm going to go over here. See this little arrow? This arrow takes me back to the adjustment list. So I get all these, and I'm going to add my color balance layer. Now when I add one, you'll notice here, it didn't come in, so I've got to clip it. Now it's clipped to, and what it does is it's clipped to this one, which is clipped to this one, so they kind of stack on top of each other. And now I'm going to adjust him. And what's cool about the color balance adjuster is you can change things based on highlights, midtones, or shadows. So with my highlights, I'm just going to take and I'm going to add blue into the highlights. And you can see how the brighter areas of my image are going to go blue. Then I can take my midtones and do the same thing. And I might leave my shadows alone so that I have some of those browns and some of those dark colors in here. And then I can go down to my hue and saturation and try and bring some of those colors back in or get rid of them completely. And you can see how that changes the look. So they affect each other. And the order that they're in also changes things. So watch what happens if I take, let's just take my saturation back up, or take my saturation down to nothing. So here I've taken him and I made him purely black and white first. So you can see if I unclick the color balance, I've taken the saturation all the way down to 0. He's pure black and white. Then I've added the colors on top. Now if I flip-flop the order, here's something interesting that's going to happen. So if I just take my color balance, and you can see that, but then I flip the hue saturation up to the top, and then I turn it on, it negates my color balance filter, or adjustment. I keep saying filters. It's not a filter, really. Not technically speaking, at least. Okay? So by having the hue saturation on the top, it then makes grayscale anything that's underneath it. So all of this color balance work that I did that's in this adjustment layer now means nothing, because I threw a saturation layer on top of it that went down to 0. So all that color work is now gone because this is at 0. So the order that these things are in is actually also rather important. Okay? So I kind of want you to understand that. But your goal is to step back and take a look at the different elements in your image and start to think about how they fit together. Do they fit together? What's different? Does the contrast change? Does the colors change? You know, colors can be very subtle. If I look at, let's just trash both of these layers here. If I look at this, you can see his face is rather warm toned. It's rather orangish, reddish, you know. I might want to get rid of that. I might like that. I mean, against the background, he looks a little weird. Now, maybe what I really want to do is warm up my background a little bit. So what I'll do is click on my background, and let's add a color balance adjustment layer here. And in my midtones, let's punch up a little bit of red. So let's just see what that's going to look like. So we can just zoom in here and adjust this nice and close. So I'm just going to punch a little bit of red into there. Wow, that looks a lot better, doesn't it? Holy cow. All of a sudden, my background's really warmed up. However, look at what happened to my water. It went rather purplish, didn't it? Okay? If I turn that off, you can see, wow, I love the warmth that's in these fake rock cliffs that I made. Okay? It looks more like sandstone or something. But my water now went really magenta. And you know what? So did my clouds. My clouds have a definite magenta tone to them. So here's where I can use this, masking feature. So all I have to do, and I'm just going to show this to you a little bit, I'm not going to do the whole thing, but what I can do is go back to my quick selection tool, and I can start adding a selection here, and it might take me a little while to get it, right, because it's eaten into some of these cliffs. But it's doing a pretty good job here. The water is going to be really tough. See what happens. Yeah, see the water it really doesn't like. It's getting there though. And I can pull a selection on all these. Now it's interesting. I should probably turn him off because it was using him as a border. Whoa, that didn't work very well. So anyway, let's just use this. Now what I can do, the layer mask is already there, right? So I can't just click the layer mask button like I showed you before when we were doing selections. What do I need to do now? It's actually a really simple answer. What do I need to do? I'm just going to get a big, fat, huge black brush. And what will happen is the selection will keep me from painting into the cliff. So I'll make sure I've clicked on my layer mask, go to a regular brush, make sure I've got black, and I'm just going to make this huge fat brush here. Make sure it's got full hardness on the edges and full opacity up in the options here. And as I paint that, can you see it going regular cold bluish? Pretty cool, huh? So now I've adjusted my color. Okay? Now I realize I lost this cliff back here, but you know what? I kind of like that. You know why I like that? Anybody guess why I might like that? What does it look like? What's that? It looks like, to me, it looks like it's further away. One of the things we talked about briefly, I think it was 2-3 weeks ago before Thanksgiving, we talked about atmospheric elements in paintings and stuff, and how contrast gets lower as it goes further away, and things get cooler as they go further away, don't they? So here in this image, by warming up the front pieces, but allowing the back piece to be more like the background and cooler in tone, I've now increased the sense of depth, haven't I? It looks like this is a little hazier and it's further away. There's less contrast, there's cooler tones. So I actually really like this. So I would probably keep that. That was kind of a nice little mistake. I wasn't planning on that. And then down here, I'm just going to have to paint in by hand. Okay? You know, I could continue the selection probably and continue that process, but I didn't want to make it too much of a, you know, of a big deal. And so now I've got a great start, and if I turn my guy's layer back on here, you can see how the tones, the nice warm tones that are in the background match up with the warm tones on his face. He now really looks like he's in the sunshine, and so do the cliffs in the background. If I left them kind of cold the way they were, they didn't really mix. These are little tiny details, but they're very important for you to kind of pay attention to. They're very important for you to pay attention to because this is what's going to sell your image. You're making a digital composite. You're trying to put things together that weren't together in the beginning. So having these little details taken care of, they're huge. Does this make sense to everybody? How this is working and why I might do it? Does anybody have any questions about it? Adjustment layers. Couple quick things. Number one, you can clip them so that they affect one layer. If you don't clip them, they affect everything that's below it. So notice I didn't clip this layer here, but because the only layer that's below it is the background layer, doesn't matter. Okay? But if I start putting other layers below this, then they would be affected by the same color balance adjustment layer as the background. 2, they come with layer masks. Yay! So you can control very specifically what is adjusted and what is not on a layer. And 3, they're stackable. So as you add adjustment layers, they affect each other, and as a subtext to that, the order of the layer adjustment layers matters. So if you put like I showed you before, you put the saturation at the bottom and then a color balance on top, you'll still have color. But if you change the color on the bottom and you add a desaturate adjustment on the top, then you have no color anymore, and that color balance adjustment layer is useless. Okay, so the order of these things really does matter, and you can drag and drop and play with them to kind of experiment with how it looks. Any questions? All right, that's it.